On November 14, 2012, at the Friends Arena in Stockholm, Sweden, England was playing in an international friendly match. In the 89th minute, with 2 goals apiece, Zlatan Ibrahimović received the ball 30 yards from goal with his back to the net. He let it go over his shoulder, twisted, and threw himself into a bicycle kick, which left the goalkeeper, Joe Hart, completely motionless. The ball had flown into the top corner. Oh, the stadium erupted. English commentators went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that only occurs when something happens that language is not quite equipped to describe. It was later voted as the greatest international goal ever scored in history. And for Zlatan Ibrahimović, it was just another Tuesday. This is his story. He was born in Malmö, Sweden, on October 3, 1981, in a family of immigrants from the former Yugoslavia. His father, Sefik, was Bosnian. His mother, Jurka, was a Croatian. They had separated when Zlatan was young, and he had spent his childhood moving back and forth between their 2 households, neither of which had provided much stability. He grew up in Rosengård, one of the most deprived neighborhoods of Malmö, a place of concrete apartment blocks, high unemployment, and the population composed mainly of immigrants and their children. It was not the kind of place that produced professional footballers. Most people who grew up there were written off before they started. Zlatan was not having that script from the beginning. He was not the most naturally gifted kid on the pitch in the traditional way. There were boys with better technique, boys who were coached earlier and more carefully. What set him apart was something harder to teach, an absolute refusal to accept that anyone was better than him. He believed in himself with a completeness which verged on the irrational, and it was just that irrationality which was its power. In Rosengård, where the world's messages were for the most part discouraging, that belief was his armor, his engine. He played for local club Balkan as a boy, then joined the Malmö FF youth setup, and it quickly became very apparent that whatever this kid from Rosengård had, it was for real. At Malmö FF, Ibrahimović was a teenager who moved and thought like he was already playing on a higher level. He was tall, technically audacious, and physically dominant in a way that most boys his age simply were not. He had also already developed the personality which would characterize his entire career, a total belief in his own ability, which made him magnetic and difficult at the same time. Coaches who tried to rein him in found the exercise mostly pointless. Those that knew how to focus it got something extraordinary in return. He broke into the first team and by 2001 got the attention of Ajax, one of the most prestigious youth development clubs in the world. The Ajax years were formative in many complex ways. Technically, Ibrahimović became enormous. The Dutch style of football required intelligence and touch, and he had both. But the environment also caused friction. He clashed with teammates and coaches and refused to warm down after training and demanded to be treated as the most important player in the squad, a demand that was, given his ability, perhaps justified, but which made him unpopular in a dressing room constructed on collective values. The moment that announced him to the world came in an Ajax training session, when he did an outrageous beauty bicycle kick that even people who had trouble dealing with him had to stop and stare. That goal, and others like it, made his departure in 2004 bittersweet to everyone involved. Ajax knew that they were letting something remarkable walk out the door. They let him walk anyway. Juventus signed him in 2004, and it was under Fabio Capello that Ibrahimović began the transformation from talented provocateur to real world-class striker. Capello wasn't a manager who tolerated ego for too long. He demanded discipline, tactical intelligence, and physical conditioning at the highest possible level. Ibrahimović was able to meet all the demands. He worked harder than anyone expected, transformed his body, and began to possess the entire vocabulary of the modern centre-forward. Not just the flamboyant tricks and the bicycle kicks, but the hold-up play, the pressing, the movement off the ball that creates space for others. Under Capello, he scored 23 league goals in 2 seasons, won back-to-back titles in the Italian top league, later stripped for the Calciopoli scandal, and rose to be one of the most prolific attacking players in Europe. He had learned what elite football really did need. He would never forget this lesson. At Inter Milan, under Jose Mourinho, Ibrahimovic was in the best part of his club career so far. From 2006 to 2009, he was the winner of 3 consecutive titles of the Italian First Division, part of one of the scariest strike partnerships in Italian football, together with Adriano, and working for the undisputed protagonist of the attack. He scored 66 goals in 88 games in the Serie A, numbers which understate his contribution, as Ibrahimovic was never just a goal scorer. He was a presence, some gravitational force around which defences had to organise themselves. His ability to receive the ball with his back to goal, hold off physical defenders, and play teammates through with a deft touch or a precision pass was by this stage as impressive as his finishing. He had become the full-on, complete striker. He was also, beyond any doubt, one of the most recognisable and charismatic figures in world football. He was signed in 2009 by Barcelona for about 69 million euros. What happened next was one of the most fascinating and revealing episodes of his career. Pep Guardiola's Barcelona was based on a set of principles: total positional discipline, incessant pressing, and a system where every person, no matter their stature, was subordinate to the team. It was the opposite of all that Zlatan Ibrahimović stood for. He lasted 1 season. He and Guardiola butted heads numerous times, the details of which Ibrahimović recounted with typical bluntness in his autobiography. He accused Guardiola of bad man management, of freezing him out rather than facing him right on, of sacrificing a world-class striker at the altar of a system. Guardiola's version was different. The truth, as is usually the case, was somewhere in between. What is now beyond dispute is that the Barcelona chapter influenced Ibrahimovic's public persona in permanent ways. He left not as a defeated man, but as a man who had walked away from the most celebrated club in the world and was totally unrepentant about it. In his autobiography, he referred to Guardiola as a philosopher who was scared of his own players. It was the sort of statement that most footballers would never dare make. Ibrahimović made it, added a couple more, and moved on. The failure at Barcelona was, in his telling, never really a failure at all. It was confirmation that he worked by his own rules, in his own universe, and that no system, however brilliant, was large enough to contain him. He returned to Italy with AC Milan, first on loan and then permanently, and went on to deliver one of the great redemption performances in recent football history. He scored 56 goals in 85 games, won the title of the Italian First Division in 2011, and was elected as the most valuable player in the league. He was 30 years old, and he was playing some of the best football of his life. The Milan supporters, who had seen great players come and go in the course of decades of history, recognized something in him which was more than the goals. A mentality, a refusal to coast, a seriousness about the game which existed alongside the theatrics and the one-liners. He was a leader by example and by his personality, and Milan knew it every time he stepped onto the pitch. Manchester United took him to the Premier League in 2016 when he was 34 years old, and most analysts thought his best days were behind him. He responded by scoring 28 goals in his debut season, winning the League Cup and the Europa League, and becoming, somehow, even more of a cultural phenomenon than he already was. English football had not quite seen anything like him. He was too old to be doing what he was doing, too physically commanding to be a man of his age, and far too good to be treated as a nostalgia signing. He called himself a lion. He talked about himself in the third person, with a frequency that would have been exhausting if it had not been somehow endearing. He had sales of shirts that surpassed players half his age. And then, cruelly, a serious knee injury cut the season short and threatened, for the first time, to finally impose on a man who had always refused to have anything to do with limits. He recovered. He joined the LA Galaxy in the MLS in 2018 and, within days of arriving there, scored a goal from the halfway line on his debut. It was a lofted, arrogant chip over the goalkeeper from 50 yards. And then went through his post-match interview as if this was the kind of thing that just happened when Zlatan showed up. In 2 seasons with the Galaxy, he scored 52 goals in 58 games played and became the most watched player in the history of the league. He raised the level of every game he played just by playing it. He gave press conferences, which became appointment viewing. He was, by this point, as much a performance as a footballer, a walking, talking, goal-scoring argument against the notion that there is a natural ceiling to careers. He returned to AC Milan in January 2020, aged 38, and played 2.5 more seasons with the club. He helped the young squad around him develop, scoring important goals in a title-winning campaign in 2021-22 that meant more for what it said about the club's revival than any individual. He was a veteran presence in the best sense. Somebody had won everything, been everywhere, and was still willing to train harder than players who were 15 years his junior. A significant knee injury in 22 finally brought an end to his time at Milan, and he announced his retirement from professional football in 23 at 41. Throughout all of it, there was no change in personality. Zlatan Ibrahimović built a mythology around himself with the same precision which he brought to his finishing. The quotes were endless and often hilarious, that he had tried a Mercedes but switched over to a Porsche because it was faster, that he did not need a trial at Arsenal because Arsene Wenger should have been honoured with his interest, and that he could not have an injury. After all, even his injuries got injured. They were not the words of an arrogant man who happened to be good in football, and they were the pronouncements of a man who grew up in Rosengard to be told he was nothing and had made the decision at some fundamental level that he would spend the rest of his life proving the world wrong. The feeling of confidence wasn't performance, it was survival at scale and glossed over to the point of making it a myth. What Zlatan Ibrahimović leaves behind is a career of staggering proportions. He scored over 570 career goals across club and country, won league titles in the Netherlands, Italy, France, England, and Sweden, and played for some of the most famous clubs on the planet across a professional career that spanned more than 2 decades. He won the Serie A title 6 times across 3 different clubs. He was the all-time top scorer for the Swedish national team with 62 goals. He played elite football into his 40s. But the legacy is also something less quantifiable. He changed the idea of what a modern striker could be. Before him, the dominant model was either the clinical penalty box finisher or the hard-running, team-first centre-forward. Ibrahimović was neither. He was a 6'5" athlete who moved like a dancer, thought like a playmaker, finished like a sniper, and carried himself like a man who believed, genuinely and without irony, that he was the most interesting person in any room he entered. He was right often enough that the claim became impossible to dismiss. He was a one-off. There was no template for him because he refused to fit one. There will not be another like him, and the game is quieter for his absence. Zlatan Ibrahimović did not just play football. He performed it, elevated it, and made it feel, on his best days, like something closer to spectacle. In a sport full of great players, he was something rarer. He was genuinely, irreducibly, unforgettably himself.